1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1, the principles for marriage. Now, concerning the matters about which you wrote, so that apparently they wrote him a letter that they wanted Paul to clarify. Quote, he's quoting them now, "It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman," end quote. "But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but his wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourself to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." So remember what he's dealing with here. These wildly sexual people in Corinth, there's sexual immorality going on in the church. There's temple prostitutes coming down to sleep with the men every night. And so they write them concerning marriage. They're like, is it good? Like, should we just not be having sex with women? Paul says, okay, listen, but because of the temptation for sexual immorality, it's actually good to have a wife and have sex with each other. That's a good thing, guys. Don't deprive each other. And if you're going to, just make an agreement. Otherwise, Satan will come in and your self-control. You're lacking self-control right now, guys. So he's saying marriage is a good thing. Now, he says it as a concession. Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this. Right? So he's not saying the Lord says. He's just making a concession because the sexual immorality is so rampant in Corinth. He says this, "I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that is good for them to remain single, as I am." See, Paul was a single guy, unmarried. His life was so crazy. Could you imagine being Paul's wife, wondering if he's going to come home every night? The guy's nearly getting killed everywhere he goes. He's traveling, a minister for the gospel to the Gentiles. So he says, hey, that's a good thing. If you're unmarried, single, widows, that's a good thing. Remain single. And remember, they all thought Jesus was coming back real soon. But if they cannot exercise self-control, get married. It is better to marry than to burn with passion. And to the married, I'd give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband. But if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife. God loves marriage. He loves good old-fashioned union, marriage, man and woman coming together, living these lives. And he says, to the rest I say, I, not the Lord. He's making clear what Paul's saying and what God is saying. That if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. And if any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So the Message version says this. And you got to remember, why is he saying this? Well, because at the time, guys, the message was new. The gospel message was new. Some people are getting saved. They're already married. They're married to unbelievers. They're like, well, what do we do? Do we divorce the unbeliever to get married to a believer? Do we start all over? What's the deal? And Paul says, no, look. If you're married, stay married. Your behavior, your actions, who knows? This might be the path that God uses to save your spouse. Don't go getting divorced over something like this. The Message version says this. The rest of you who are in these mixed marriages of Christians and non-Christians, There's no explicit command from Jesus. So this is what you do. If you're with a man who is with a wife who's not a believer but wants to live with you, hold on to her. If you're a woman with a husband who's not a believer but he wants to live with you, hold on to him. The unbelieving husband shares to an extent the holiness with his wife. And the unbelieving wife is likewise touched by the holiness in her husband. Otherwise, your children would be totally left out. And as it is, they're also included in the spiritual purposes of God. Remember, nothing in and of itself is unclean. Your children, right? It's not about who you're married to that makes the child holy. It's about God. And Paul says this, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him, into which God has called him. This is my rule in all churches. Was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision. For neither circumcision counts for anything nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. Each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. Don't be doing drastic things with your life just because you're saved. If you were a Jew who got saved, don't be trying to get rid of the circumcision. If you weren't circumcised and you got saved, don't go cutting anything off, guys. That doesn't matter. That's what Paul's trying to say. Each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. Were you a bondservant when you were called? Don't be concerned about it. But if you can become free, avail yourself of the opportunity. For he who was called in the Lord as a bondservant is a freedman of the Lord. Likewise, he who is free when called is a bondservant of Christ. You were bought with a price. Do not become bondservants of men. So, brothers, in whatever condition each was called, there let him remain with God. Make the best of your situation, guys. Don't go doing anything drastic just because you're saved. It's the inner working of God within you. And so Paul says this. Oh, wow, this chapter's kind of long. Paul says this. Now, concerning the betrothed, the widowed, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. Are you bound to your wife? Do not seek to be free. Are you free from a wife? Do not seek a wife, right? Guys, we can't get in this mindset that the grass is always greener. Either way. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. Keep that in mind for anybody that wants to accuse anybody of divorce and remarry, any of that stuff. And if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. Yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away. Let's see what it says here. All right, so here's what it says. I do want to point out, friends, that time is of the essence. There is no time to waste. So don't complicate your lives unnecessarily. Keep it simple in marriage, in grief, in joy, whatever it is. Even in the ordinary things, your daily routines of shopping and so on. Deal as sparingly as possible with the things the world thrusts on you. The world as you see it is fading away. Beautiful advice, right? Beautiful advice. Paul shares his heart with us right here when he says, I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, like how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint on you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. If anyone thinks that he is not behaving properly toward his betrothed, if his passions are strong, and it has to be, let him do as he wishes. Let them marry. It is no sin. But whoever is firmly established in his heart, being under no necessity, but having his desire under control, and has determined this in his heart, to keep her as his betrothed, he will do well. So then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do better. A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment she is happier if she remains as she is, and I think that I too have the Spirit of God. Let's check out the Message version here. It says this: if a woman has a friend to whom he is, if a man has a woman friend to whom he is loyal, but never intended to marry, having decided to serve God as single and then changes his mind, deciding that he should marry her, well, then go ahead and get married. It's not a sin. It's not even a step down from celibacy, as some say. On the other hand, if a man is comfortable in his decision for a single life in service to God, and it's entirely his own conviction and not imposed on him by others, well, stick with it. Marriage is spiritually and morally right and not inferior to singleness in any way. Although, as I indicated earlier, because of the times we live in, I do have reasons for encouraging singleness. A wife must stay with her husband as long as he lives. If he dies, she is free to marry anyone she chooses. She will, of course, want to marry a believer and have the blessings of Jesus. By now, you know that I think she'll be better off staying single. The master, in my opinion, thinks so too. Okay, guys, so just to wrap this up, let's put it in context. They thought Jesus was coming back ASAP. They were saying, don't go making any crazy changes in your life, guys. Remember, Paul's talking about what it was like to be an apostle. He's getting persecuted and beat and reviled. Now, do you want to be getting married in the middle of that kind of situation? And he's saying, look, if you do, there's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying you might be better off single. And so Paul is not saying it's a sin to get married, or, people can take this and they can transport it to 2023. Look, the point is, at this time, guys, things were crazy for Christians. But Paul makes it very clear. Marriage is a good thing. Relationships are a good thing. And singleness is a good thing. Whatever it is, whatever your heart is leading you to, because that's where Christ lives. And he's going to guide us and direct us into peace. And what decisions we make with him in us and through us, guys. So don't get caught off guard with all this marriage talk. Remember the circumstances going on. On top of that, he has to give instructions to these crazy Corinth people, these crazy Corinthians, who are living in the midst of sexual immorality and wild marriages and non-marriages and everything else going on. So listen, Paul's got to give them the basics. And that's what he's doing right here.